This week our topic is vocabulary and learning in the content areas. Our content areas are math, science, social studies, health, and anything else that would fall outside of the English language arts curriculum. Our story of the week is Creepy Carrots. Listen to the story read in the video, and then brainstorm how you can use this story across a curriculum in a vegetable theme. You're going to check your answers on the next slide and drop your sharing in the weekly literature sharing Dropbox. This next slide does have our literature ideas. Now I know that's too small for you to see, but you can access that literature idea form in your weekly presentation file folder on D2L. So that way you can see all my answers. Also on the slide are some interesting links. The one at the top is the lesson plan ideas for this book. The video is a video of Peter Brown, the illustrator, and it's how he developed the illustrations for the story. This is a fantastic resource to share with students, especially students who are becoming authors and writing their own stories and doing some of the illustrations. And it's neat to see how these characters evolve through the process he goes through. At the bottom, I have a biography for our author, and again, that's another good resource to share with students. We'll move into our weekly message, and there's one activity when you click on here for a warm-up. So read the message, do the warm-up, and then your weekly journal entry is going to be describe the principles that guide the teaching of vocabulary. How and when would you as the teacher integrate vocabulary into your teaching to create a thematic content-based learning environment? So it's really 2 questions this week. Make sure you answer both questions clearly and then make your connection. Now our warm-up, where it said here in your message, is going to be to watch this video, and this video is going to give you directions. Then you'll go to the PA SAS website, which is linked right here in green, and you're going to choose a content area for whichever grade level you want to work with. And you can choose anything from pre-K to grade 4. This video will tell you what to do once you're there. Then you're going to share here, and that's going to take you to a Padlet board. That Padlet board is going to be one part of your participation points for the week. Remember, each week you can earn up to 10 points. The first topic we'll be looking at is what is vocabulary? And this slide gives you some facts about vocabulary. I have an activity right here called a story impression, and this is an activity you do with students when you are getting them ready for new vocabulary. A story impression is something that you do pre-reading, and it gives you, number one, information about their background knowledge in the words that you'll be introducing, or even the content you're going to be introducing. And number 2, it's a fun way to get them tuned in to the words they're going to learn soon. Remember, when you tune them in, they pay more attention when they encounter those words during the lesson. With our story impression, you'd want to go back at the very end of the lesson and you'd have them rewrite the story. So it has 3 parts. It has a before reading, during reading, and after reading activity. Now, this week we have about 30 slides. This story impression is going to be optional. If you want to try it out, you can share it right here on our Padlet board and follow these directions. It is a fun activity. If you're pressed for time, you may skip the activity, but I do want you to read over these words so you're tuned into them and see if there's any there that you don't understand. Okay? Moving on, we're going to talk about academic vocabulary. And then we move into vocabulary knowledge. And there's 3 kinds of vocabulary knowledge. Please click the Listen and Learn podcast so I can explain this to you in detail because it is slightly confusing. Then we move into the tiers of vocabulary. And on this slide, you're going to click the Listen and Learn podcast. It's over in the opposite corner. But that'll give you all the information to explain these 3 tiers to you. The next category is explicit instruction, and I know we've talked about explicit instruction, so you know what it is, but when we're discussing vocabulary, you have to explicitly teach these categories of words. So not only do we teach words, but categories of words. Our podcast is up here in the right-hand corner. Listen to that for some information. And then just take a minute and check the 3 videos at the bottom. They're going to give you some vocabulary resources to use in your classroom. This is an explanation and kind of like a show and tell of some of the resources that I use for students in my classroom. So you can click on this slide and watch a little video of some of the really neat things I like to use for vocabulary. Moving on to how vocabulary develops, there are 4 stages. Pay attention to this because this is also something that will be important for your journal entry. This will give you some answers. And in the bottom right-hand corner is our podcast. Please make sure you listen to that as you view this slide. Also, the timeline of development has a podcast, and this explains how children learn vocabulary. From the time they're pre-K students to the time they're 4th graders, there's definitely a growth in their vocabulary that's hugely significant. Listen to the podcast for more information. Now we shift from what is vocabulary to vocabulary instruction. This slide is very important also for your journal entry because it talks about the 6 principles that guide our instruction as the teacher. Please listen to the podcast in the bottom right corner for more information on each principle. And then we talk about being active learners when it comes to vocabulary instruction. And quite honestly, vocabulary can be completely boring and something children hate in your classroom. But if we're actively learning words and we're engaging children, they will remember these words and they will enjoy your vocabulary time. The podcast in the bottom right corner explains to you how we have active learning. Now, this is your weekly participation Dropbox activity. It's the one activity that you will need to do and put in the participation Dropbox. So here's how we do it. Basically, there are several different vocabulary activities, and they're listed right here in the white box. These are also things that you could choose for your lesson plan too, because if you remember last week for comprehension, we had a couple activities that were vocabulary activities, and I said that if you waited a week, you could choose those as well. A lot of these I try to model throughout the presentation, so you will probably have noticed we've done word sorts, we've done concept circles, we've done exclusion brainstorm, and we've done knowledge rating scale. So I try to model these within my own instruction so you can see them in action. So if you can kind of tune back in, that'll help you out. For the activity, so you can learn what these are, you're going to do 2 parts. The first part is to go into D2L in the presentation file folder and open up the vocabulary instructional activity file. It looks like this, but it's a whole page, and you're probably going to want to either bring it up on your screen or print it out for this activity. What this is activities at the top, examples them or samples, and then at the bottom we have 10 different instructional activities for vocabulary, and they are listed over here as well. You're going to basically match them up. You're going to match an activity to the name. When you think you have your answers correct, take a picture of it or screenshot it, whatever you want to do, and drop it in the participation Dropbox for the week, and then watch this video. It's really important that you watch the video because that will explain all of the answers to you and make this much more meaningful when you try it out on your own in your classroom. You know that I love online resources, and so I found 3 websites here. Reading Rockets, I know you've been to, fcrr.org, I know you've been to, and Pinterest, I know you've been to, but I have specifically targeted vocabulary for each one. So take a minute and browse through them, and when you find something you really like that's related to vocabulary instruction, click here on our Padlet board and share that for participation points this week. Now we move out of vocabulary instruction and we move into content area learning, and this is where we create thematic units to teach our science curriculum, our social studies curriculum, geography, history, health, whatever it might be. And what you'll do is first complete a knowledge rating scale. This was actually up there in vocabulary activities. So I have 6 different content area learning concepts, and I was going to have you do this for participation points, but I know we need to move through this presentation a little more quickly. So I'd like you to just kind of jot down in your head mentally, do you know these words? Have you heard of these words? And do you have no idea what the word means? When we talk about it in the presentation, tune into the ones that you were on the I have no idea side. But again, this is just for practice for you. Then I want you to read about the little boys on the left-hand side. There's two boys, Jimmy and Matt, and they are having an interesting conversation as fourth graders. I want you to think about these two questions as you read. How can you relate to the topic they're talking about? And how can the same material that's hard in one class be easy in another? Okay, just think about that, and we'll move into that for our next slide. Now, to be an effective teacher of reading, there's qualities listed on the left. To be an effective teacher of content, we have qualities on the right. You can see, though, by examining the Venn diagram that they do match up. And I do have right here a podcast that explains the importance of this slide to you. We move then into learning materials. And sorry, saw a little typo there. Learning materials are the materials that will facilitate your content area learning. So how do we teach it? What do we use? We look at textbooks, and there are 6 questions we want to ask before we use a textbook. I explain why we want to use these questions in the podcast, so click right there and listen to it as you watch the slide. We learn about trade books, and then we see the benefits of trade books on the next slide. Again, there's a podcast in the corner. Make sure you listen to it because it explains everything to you a little bit more detailed than the slide does. I will give you the 5 A's for choosing a trade book, and listen to the podcast so I can explain them to you. And then you're off again to the internet. There are so many amazing ways to integrate literature in your content area learning. What I'd like you to do is take a few minutes and click on each of these links. So we have a math bookshelf, we have a Pinterest board for math, we have a science bookshelf and a Pinterest board for science, we have a social studies trade book site, and we have a Pinterest board. I want you to browse them and then look at, when you find something that you really think is valuable, click here and share it on Padlet. That way everyone has access to these resources. If you see anything that is just phenomenal and you want to post it on Facebook, you could do that as well. Next, we have using trade books in the classroom. So after you choose that book, now you know how, what do you do with it? We talk a lot about, is it a before reading strategy, a during reading strategy, or an after reading strategy? And this will kind of break that down for you. Make sure you listen to the podcast in the bottom right corner for explanation. Then I want to share with you some of my favorite literature-based math activities. Although I love teaching reading more than math, I like to bring my reading time into my math instruction, and students really appreciate that as well. You will be shocked to know how many books there are out there for math. Watch a quick video of some of my own resources. The last area, or almost last area, it is our last main area of instruction, is thematic units. And how do we take those content area concepts and turn them into theme-based learning? There are 7 steps to plan a unit. So planning the whole entire unit. These are the steps. I have a podcast in the bottom right corner. You'll want to listen to that so I can explain these steps to you in detail. And then if you are a real visual person, you might want to turn to page 362 to 365 in your textbook. You can see a visual layout of a unit plan. Teaching content area also requires you to integrate lots of activities. Some of these activities go back to that knowledge rating scale that you may not have known. So just take a minute and check out what is an anticipation guide, what is previewing, what is brainstorming, what is an eye chart, and what is an idea circle. These are all activities you can use to teach in the content areas. The podcast will explain them to you because you definitely want to check that podcast out. And each of the activities has a website that will take you for more information. So make sure that you get a chance to do that so you really can see them in action. And that's the end of our material. I am going to introduce to you now the curriculum alignment project that will be due on February the 28th. And so what you'll need to do is go into D2L to the project area and look at the handout for the project. Have that handy because this video will go over that handout and it will explain the project to you and it will go over the rubric with you. And our weekly assignments. And I just want to clarify a couple things, so listen carefully. First of all, you have your weekly journal entry. Remember, there's 2 questions built into the journal entry this week, and I kind of pointed out the slides that would help you find answers. You have 3 in-presentation participation activities for your 10 points. You have a Padlet on slide 5. You have a Padlet on slide 20. And you have a Padlet on slide 30. We also have our weekly literature sharing for Creepy Carrots. Remember to Dropbox that. That's going to be worth 5 points. And then we have 1 activity that goes in the participation Dropbox, and that's your vocabulary activity sort. That means there's a total of 4 participation activities, so that's what you're going to be graded on for your 10 participation points this week. By the end of the semester, you'll need 10 pins for vocabulary and content area. If you'd like to break that board into 2, you may do that, or you can put them together. They do fit nicely together. Also for next week, if you get a chance, skim Chapter 6. We'll be talking about Chapter 6. And you don't need to read the article in D2L for next week, but definitely have it ready because we'll be interacting with it during the presentation next week. And it's called Young Girls Discovering Their Voice with Literacy and Readers Theater. It's a great article, and it'll move into our topic of fluency. The only other thing you have, and I know this is a condensed course, so you have work upon work, but I introduced the curriculum alignment project today. The children's book list I introduced way in the beginning of the semester. Now might be a good time to work on that because you definitely have the background knowledge and skills to do this now. Also, in the children's book list project, one of your sets of books to collect is on a theme. If you would like to use your curriculum alignment project theme and book list together, you may use the same books for each one. And last, you're finishing up your second lesson demonstration. That's the comprehension or vocabulary. So keep up all the good work. I know you're busy, and I tried to pull some things out this week and not require as much as if we were in a 15-week course. I'm busy on my end grading and all too. The other thing I want to mention is please make sure you are going into D2L when I post grades and checking out all the comments and feedback because I do take the time to write them because I think they're meaningful to you. So please make sure you're checking those out when you're checking your grades, and have a great week.